In this chapter, we'll look at the modifier stack, which is a layers-based interface which allows us to stack effects on top of one another to achieve more complex results. The example we'll use is actually a very simple one, which is this fruit bowl here. And this was done procedurally. In other words, I didn't explicitly model the positions of all the points on this object. It was generated from some relatively simple instructions using the 3ds Max modifier stack. Let's take a look at it first before we start fresh from scratch. I'll select it and go over to the Modify panel, and we can expand that a little bit so we can see more. Each one of these is a modifier with the exception of the one at the bottom, which is the base object or sphere. And we can do things like turn the modifiers on and off. Little eye icon here will disable it. You can see that shell is adding thickness. We've got, for example, a stretch modifier that's changing the shape. And a bunch of other cool stuff in here that we'll look at as we go. All right, so that's what we're going to end up with. Let's now start fresh with a new scene. Go over to the application icon here in the upper left corner and choose Reset. And then choose Don't Save because we don't need to save this. And then, do you really want to reset? Yes. Reset is just like restarting the program. When you reset 3ds Max, it wipes everything out of memory and creates a new default fresh scene. And it's much faster than shutting the program down and restarting it. All right, with a blank scene now, let's go ahead and build up our little fruit bowl. We can use a sphere to do that. Go over to the Create panel, Geometry, Standard Primitives, Sphere, and draw it out in the top view. The reason I want you to draw it in the top view is because that'll make it so that it is aligned with the poles along the z-axis here. Okay, so if I drew it in a different view, then it would be aligned differently. For example, if I draw in the front view, then we can see here that the poles are pointed not in the z-axis, but in the world y-axis. Go over to the perspective view, right-click in there, and view the edged faces with F4. We can really see the difference there. The viewport that you use to create something affects its orientation. All right, that second sphere is not necessary, so I'll delete that with the Delete key on the keyboard. Go back to the first one here. But remember, I'm still in sphere mode, so I want to right-click to exit that, and then select that sphere. Go into its Modify panel, and we want to change up some parameters here. Let's give it a radius of 15 inches, and then the number of segments is very important. That has to do with the so-called level of detail, or what is the polygon or mesh density of the object. Let's get in closer here with the perspective view highlighted. Use Alt-W to zoom in. Let's get rid of these selection brackets with the J key. And we can change the color, make it a little bit easier to see. We've got a color for the object here. That's not a material, it's the object color, which are two different things in 3ds Max. Let's click on that object color and change it to something a little bit easier to see. Let's make it a gray color and click OK. And now we can see each and every polygon or each and every face on that surface. And if we increase the number of segments over here, we can increase the density or the level of detail. If I bring that down to a very low number, then we have a very low level of detail. Or I could bring it up to something higher. Let's set it to a nice round number. Let's give it 64 segments. And that's the same as the example I showed a moment ago. Let's just zero this out in 3D space. So choose the Move tool and then type in zeros for X, Y, and Z. 0, tab, 0, tab, 0, just to clean up that scene. All right, we got our base object, which is a sphere with a relatively decent level of detail of 64 segments. Okay, so we've got the level of detail for the object set up, and we're ready to move on now to positioning the pivot point in preparation for constructing our modifier stack.